Third quarter evidence-based practice roundtable presentation. Quick background for those of us new in the room. So the Child and Adolescent Mental Health Division, or CAMD's Evidence-Based Services Committee, has probably over the last, I think maybe going on 16, 17 years now, has played a sort of sounding board for various quality improvement initiatives within CAMD and the Department of Education. And one of the things that we're doing that we've started up in the last 2.5 years is once per quarter, we have what we call our evidence-based practices, a roundtable discussion. And the focus of that roundtable discussion is it centers on something related to evidence-based practice or quality improvement more in general for the Hawaii's youth receiving mental health services can be in a variety of settings, such as HYCF, FCLB, CAMD, Department of Education, and so forth. Previous presentations have centered on practices such as multisystemic therapy, functional family therapy, wide variety of different things. And today's presentation is focusing on the emerging practice of mindfulness as it applies to application with youth in youth service systems. So we have a board, a presentation panel that I'm going to be introducing in just a minute. But first, if we could do a quick introduction. Who do we have on VTC? Jamie, is that you? I can't see. Okay, so Jamie from Hilo, and it looks like Kauai as well. So welcome, Kauai. Who do we have from Kauai? Welcome. Okay. So a couple of people on VTC. So in terms of the format of the presentation, I'll do a quick introduction. So the core of the presentation will be from Dr. Tao Lei and Nicholas Liulamaga Mackenzie. I'll introduce them in a little bit. So they're going to start off with their presentation, and then I'll introduce the rest of the panel, and we'll open it up for some more of a sort of fluid and ongoing discussion about thoughts and reactions. Okay. So any questions or comments before we start? Okay. Okay, everybody's so serious. Yeah, super serious. It's like, this is a very serious group. No laughing about it. Yeah, super serious. Yeah, it's good. Jenna's smiling. Jenna will change the atmosphere of the room by smiling. So, Dr. Lee is an associate professor in the Family and Consumer Sciences Department at the University of Hawaii Manoa and currently teaches courses in adolescent development and mindfulness. Prior to joining UH, she was faculty in the Human Development and Family Studies program at Colorado State University, where she received tenure and worked for 10 years at a nonprofit research think tank on evaluation and prevention of youth violence among ethnic and immigrant minority youth populations. Her current interest and focus is to bring mindfulness to reduce stress, promote resiliency, and flourishing among students, teachers, and social service professionals and disadvantaged communities, both in the U.S. and Southeast Asia. Nicholas Liulamaga Mackenzie is a youth correctional officer and trainer at the Hawaii Youth Correctional Facility. He graduated from California State University, Fresno with degrees in kinesiology and leadership in management. Okay, so let's give them a warm welcome. So, take it away.
Start off actually with an experiential mindfulness activity. And Nick, I invited Nick to come to actually lead us into this activity. So it's not just purely academic or himself. So, okay. Why don't you go ahead and start? So,
all right. Is it okay if I stand up?
Please.
I worked at HYCF about 7 years, and I've seen a lot of programs come through our doors. And I can tell you that mindfulness is one of those, for me, and I'll put it in football terms, is one of those plays that work. Now, I've seen a lot of plays that don't work for reasons, but mindfulness works there. And what I've done out there with mindfulness with Dr. Tao is we've done a mindfulness program with the wards, which are the youth that come our way. And then I've done it with the staff. Our last 2 academies that we've had that last roughly about 6 weeks or so, I've been able to present mindfulness kind of under the umbrella of self-care. which is a lot of officers, we need that kind of thing, dealing with high-risk kids and dealing with the headaches. Some of you may know. If you have teenagers, well, just magnify that a few times, and that's our population. And in doing mindfulness with Dr. Tao and a couple other people that have come through, I've learned a lot of things about it. I've gone through classes through it, I've sat in seminars on it, and so I've kind of created sort of a, and having a teaching background, I've sort of created an idea of how can this best work. And that's why I say it's the best play, because it's my play. And what I've seen there is I'm trying to find every opportunity to present mindfulness. Now, what I'm going to share with you today is a combination of both, of what I shared with the staff, or what I shared in the academy, and what has been done with the youth. Now, let me paint a picture for you. At one of our cottages, there's these windows and these French doors that face Kalaniole Highway. And one day, it was on a Sunday, I saw a couple of the wards that were cleaning the window. They saw it's a great day. And they looked back at me and they called me coach. Hey, coach, it's like a great day. Man, I wish I was at the beach. Or man, I could just wish I was out there in the sun. And I sat back there watching them clean the windows, and after they were done, I had them sit behind me. I brought out chairs and I sat them behind me and I stood right there by the window. And I said, as I look out these windows, and you do too, what do you see? And they said, well, we see the sun. Yes. What else do you see? We see green trees. Yes. What else do you see? We see cars going back and forth. Yes. And I go, you know what I see? I see telephone poles. And between each telephone pole, and I saw this as an opportunity, between two telephone poles, what happens between that moment of time, that car that passes, that's mindfulness. What happens between those two telephone poles, that moment in time, is mindfulness. Now, what you do between that telephone pole can affect the next time you go through the next telephone pole. And what has happened in the past happened in the past. I can't go backwards on the freeway. Okay. So this is what I said. So your time here at the facility, take between your telephone poles. What do you do between that? Are you going to make it count? Are you going to learn something? Are you going to learn to be peaceful? Are you going to change your ways? Because this is the only moment in time that counts right now. Nothing else matters. Because what you do here is going to affect the next telephone pole you hit. And for some reason they got it. They went, I get it. I get it. So I told them, okay, let's do mindfulness here. So I reached into my backpack and I told them, sit nice and comfortable. And I said, you're going to hear this. You're going to hear this radio and have this radio on my hip all the time. Tells me everything happens in the facility. Where every officer is, every fight, every incident goes on, everything clicks on this radio. I go, you're going to hear this radio go off. You're going to hear the phone go off. The phone may ring for wherever is in here. You may hear people popping in and out of the door. Okay. And you're going to end. That's okay. But all I want you is to concentrate on the here and now and what's important. And they said, well, what's the here and now? Well, for me, it's a solid object. What matters right here, right now. This radio ain't gonna matter. That phone ain't gonna matter. Who comes in and out of that door ain't gonna matter. What's gonna matter the most is where you're at right here, right now. And again, they go, wow, they got it. So I was thinking to myself, I'm a great teacher. They get it. So I said this. So sit down, nice and comfortable, just like how you folks are right here. Okay. And I brought out my chime and I said, I'm gonna ring this chime. And for just 1 minute, I want to ask you just to concentrate on your breath. That's it. That's the only thing you're going to pay attention to. Nothing else. And you know what happened? There was distractions in that room. The radio did go off. The phone did ring. People did pop in and out of the door. And you know, for the most part, they stayed still. Just being here, being in the here and now. Well, after a minute, we talked about it. And some of them said, man, that's a pretty cool experience. I had a young person said, you know, Nick, I don't like closing my eyes. That's fine. I asked him, can you share why? He says, yeah, because I don't like what I see when I close my eyes. I go, that's fine. But what's important here is the exercise that you're going to do with us right now. Would you folks want to participate with that? Okay, I'm going to bring on my chime. You ain't going to hear a radio. And if you hear a phone, shame on you. Okay, all right. All right. This is the chime I use. This is not the thing I just found it because my son played with this and lost my little finger. But I'm going to make it sound like this. Okay. And just for, let's say 2 minutes, I'm going to ask you just to close your eyes, sit in a nice comfortable position, and just concentrate on your breath. There you go. I'm going to ring this chime again. So I'm going to ask you to open your eyes and come back. All right. Boy, you guys are really good. I don't know if you guys even need this.
The coach is like,
Now, like I said, I've done this with the youth and I've done this with adults. And I've done this with adults like this. Now, mind you, when we enter work, there's 5 secure doors I have to go through to get to where I need to get. And with that, there's over 60 to 80 cameras that can zoom in on me wherever I walk. Zoom in on me as far as my fingertips, what's on my fingertips. Now, once I reach that last door I need to get into, I'm dealing with kids that have sat in the back of the classroom, kids that have committed crimes against their friends, their neighborhood, teachers, you name it. They've committed all kinds of crimes. Everything from murder to rape to armed robbery, things like that. Now, when I walk into that environment, I'm not the greatest person to talk to because I read their file, they're pertinent, and I go, boy, I should just throw you in your cell, get this key, and toss it. That's what you deserve. But you know, they deserve more than that. And that's why I believe I'm there. And like I said earlier, there's a lot of programs that come through. But I'm going to say there's probably a handful of programs that affect the here and here. I can give you a great program, but it ain't going to work if I don't change the mindset and I don't change your heart. Now what I do is I present the staff like, I tell the staff like this. Now I got a can of Coke here. I bought this right before I got here. Okay. And if I shake this at work, and I compare it to the amount of stress I face, it's probably like this. at work, like this. The life expectancy of a correctional officer is 55. Police officer is 61. So I don't have that much more to live if I stick around there. So somehow I have to calm myself from getting all like this stress. Okay, I can stress myself out. Now I can put this down right here, and someone can kind of open it. And that's not going to be too good for him, is it? Because I'm the guy that delivered this to him. Yeah? Let's say I do this. Another can of Coke. And I put it down. Now you don't know which can of Coke it is that I shook. Just pretending here. But I bet you wouldn't be able to tell which one's stressed and which one isn't. And the only way you would be able to tell, the only way you could tell if I open the one. That's the only way you'll be able to tell. And that's how correctional officers are there. Yeah. We're under a tremendous amount of stress. We're the first line of defense. We're the first responders. We break up fights. We end up being big brothers. We end up being spiritual leaders there. We're a lot of things. I never say we're parents, because to be honest with you, when I clock out after 8 hours, you're the last person I want to be a parent to. Yeah. But I have to keep that professional face and say, hey, tomorrow's a new day. When I show up tomorrow, we're going to start something new. And that's what I do as a YCO. And that's how mindfulness has helped us out as a staff. As a staff, has helped us out. It goes, hey, you know what? I can let this stuff go. I don't have to come here and shake my Coke can all the time. Yeah? I can sit down, relax, and be calm, just like we did here. And they've done it. And the youth are better at it too, that experience it. Now that's my little skinny on mindfulness. I can go on for hours on this. Okay? Now when I did this with youth, we did it for 10 weeks. First time I did just like this, 2 minutes. The next week, I added another minute. The next week, I added 2 minutes. It came to be a point where there was 45 minutes of just mindfulness. That's because Nick talked a lot. I sold it to him. It came to a point where they were saying, I said, hey guys, let's have a group. And they all would gather around these chairs, and they go, here goes another Nickism. That's how bad it got. But you know what? It worked. And it worked because I constantly pushed them to get it. I wanted them to get it. Because I saw the promises of it. And that's kind of what mindfulness is all about. Thank you. That's my dinner later.
So, just I asked Nick to share a little bit of what he did. There's a lot more that he engaged. Nick was actually part of the first cohort when we did the mindfulness training. And then he also did another training of 10 weeks. So he's gone through quite a bit of mindfulness training and actually did leading groups and doing training over there himself. So I just want to provide a brief overview of the landscape of the mindfulness research for those who don't know what's happening in the mindfulness research, because it's in an explosion of a lot of studies out there. And since this is an evidence-based group, I figured we got to give some evidence-based meta-analysis and studies out there. So what we know is right now, mindfulness research has increased tremendously. There's more than 5,000 studies. The majority of these studies are with adult populations, but the growing numbers with youth. There are increasingly each year more and more. I would say about 40 to 50 studies right now, but because it's changing so rapidly, there are increasing numbers. But still, it's a small numbers compared to the totality of the mindfulness research out there. In terms of clinical trials, there's been more than 125 clinical trial studies looking at the evidence base around this mindfulness change, stress, anxiety, depression, calmness, tense anxiety, insomnia, which is a big issue for youth at the correctional facilities, attention and attention focus, self-regulation, emotional regulations. Again, mainly with adults. And last year, Department of Veteran Affairs, they did one of those cognitive studies where you look at you look at all sort of the meta-analysis with respect to mindfulness. And they came up with this graph that looks at the number of studies, the clinical, and they only looked at really, rigorous studies where you have like randomized controlled trials. And other studies that they looked at, the meta-analysis studies, they found that the evidence for potential positive effect, you can't see it because it's so small, this is the evidence for potential positive effect, and in the green circles are just mindfulness intervention in general. The pink ones are the MBSR one, that's sort of, I guess, the true evidence base is the MBSR one. And then the mindfulness-based intervention. So, in terms of the evidence of potential positive effect, you see it for depression, pain, anxiety, not as many studies, but they're saying.
Please wait for the conference to begin.
And then there's unclear evidence over here, cancer and even stress, which is quite interesting because I think a lot of studies are on stress. Right? But anyhow, if you're interested in really looking at the evidence base, you can go to this report. It has the evidence map of what is effective. Right? So in general, they say depression. In the UK, mindfulness is actually can be prescribed for chronic depression among psychiatrists now. They don't mindfulness-based and therapy. Do you see it better? Okay. So there is evidence, right, with respect to mindfulness-based intervention. Samsung considers MBSRs and evidence-based that in their portfolio of what is promising in evidence-based approaches. Many of you guys probably know what are the challenges of adolescence, the transition from childhood to adolescence. Many challenges, as you're well aware of, including changes in neurotransmitters, right? Hormones, increased limbic reactivity. Right? We have the sort of the limbic system coming fully on board, right? And I wouldn't say even overactive, and that gives rise to what? More sensitivity. We know that adolescents, they visually, when they see threats of fear, they interpret it as anger as fear, right? They misinterpret sort of facial cues of fear as in terms of anger, right? Because there's a heightened sensitivity because of the sort of overreactive limbic system to threat cues and the fear processing. The amygdala is also hyper-engaged as well during adolescence. We also know that adolescence is filled with metacognitive changes, the potential for metacognitive changes, which gives rise to what? Heightened self-consciousness, right? Everybody's watching me, I've got a pimple, oh my God, everybody's looking at me, paying attention to my hair, right? That sort of heightened self-consciousness, and that has to do with sort of the ripening of the cognitive system, right? The frontal lobe is developing, that gives rise to these amazing skills, but it's both a curse and a blessing in terms of our increased ability cognitively. We also know that adolescence is the onset of many problems, right? Schizophrenia usually manifests during the adolescence, right? Psychosis, the behavioral, mental, and physical problems. It all sort of comes together during the adolescent period as well. Doesn't mean that you don't see the precursor, but somehow adolescent seems to be a ripened conditioning for a lot of these issues that happens. And associated with these issues is the issue of comorbidity. Right? That you see substance abuse, delinquency, or risky sex, it's sort of all related. And one of the problems, sort of the underlying factor behind this sort of comorbidity is the issue of dysregulation. That adolescents really have a hard time, adults have a hard time, right? But adolescents in particular, because they're still developing their frontal lobe. This regulating, right, affect. Right? When you're feeling upset, frustrated, anger, how are you able to sort of self-soothe yourself? Regulate those emotional, or be comfortable with negative emotions. Right? Adolescents don't learn this. It doesn't happen automatically overnight, right? What's the difference between an adolescent, right, a baby that comes out, and a reptile? Right? The reptile is all fully loaded and charged, and they're ready to function, and engage and find food, and whereas baby takes a long time to mature, right? When there's a person fully mature, maybe 45, right? Still developing, takes a long time. So, incarcerated youth in particular, because of what Nick mentioned, right? If you look at the rap sheets and their family history, lots and lots and lots of issues. So where do they learn how to regulate their emotions, how to be with themselves. Where? Well, they don't learn from the home family or the education system or with you guys as social service agency. Where else are they going to learn this? Hard, right? It's really hard, right? So they really have a hard time and struggle with this ability to regulate emotions, right? We as adults have a hard time, right? Person say something or your boss tells you to do something and you don't like it already. Ooh, you can feel it, right? And then you have to dampen it because you can't say something, that's unskillful. But adolescents, before they do that, how do they know that I'm experiencing anger and frustration? Sometimes it's usually after the fact. Right? So, pilot study. So we did a pilot study in Georgia, right? And this sort of the framework in which how we were able to do this. And so I asked Nick to really talk about also the context, because I think the context is a big factor. And if you look at the sort of evidence-based and clinical trials, they really don't pay attention too much to the context. They mention, oh yeah, context is important, but what about the context? And how do you get the buy-in? And I put buy-in with sustainability because it goes hand in hand, right? Because you need the buy-in to make it sustainable, right? And to be sustainable, you continually got to do the buy-in, right? It's not this one-shot kind of deal, right? That happens. You get the buy-in, and then the boss changes, staff comes in differently, right? Things are always in flux, right? So it's a continually evolving process. And the mindfulness work itself is a continually evolving process, right? So this one standard, one size fits all, which folks are trying to do, I have to say, this is my bias, it just doesn't work. Because the whole thing behind mindfulness is co-evolving, right? And co-interdependent, which means it depends on who's in the room. And you guys are all serious right now. So, my presentation is a little bit more serious because you guys are all like the serious, right? Usually what I do in other presentations, not as serious, right? But it's who's in the room, right? And how do we do this, right? So the context, and the reason why we were able to do this, partly because the warden at the time, 2013, was Al Carpenter. And he was a sort of renegade, beatnik, kind of hippy-dippy kind of guy that became a warden, right? And so when I came, and David Hipp during that time was the director, right? So I just did a presentation to Al Carpenter, and the one question he asked was, is it free? Right? And I go, yes, it's free. He goes, okay, you can do it, right? But given that he, because I had to frame it in a certain way, and I guess it appealed to his hippy-dippy kind of side when he was at Berkeley, did drugs and all that stuff, right? And he really has, so he allowed us to come in, right? But just because you come in doesn't mean that it's gonna work, right? Because who else is in there? Not just Al Carpenter. Al can tell you, like the folks, the staff, hey Nick, and Nick was actually, Nick and, who was, there was another person that came to the training. He and Nick came to the first training where we did, because before I came, and I was new to actually Hawaii, so this was sort of my first year here, or second year here, and I was kind of like getting the lay of the land, didn't know what was going on. But we did this training, and lo and behold, right, the training was doing phase 3. During this time, I'm adapting and revising the curriculum that I have from my body awareness group. So the training was a huge component. But I want Nick to also share sort of the context of why it was that we were able to do this. Because I was able to get the buy-in from Al Carpenter, right? But somehow Nick was involved, and Nick was able to get the buy-in from the other folks. Because it's not easy to do something like this, particularly when you've got an institution which got is historical sort of. We know what we need to do, and who are you to come in to do another program? We've seen so many programs come in and out, but who are you? You're a professor? Oh my God, right? Another academic wants to come in and do this kind of thing, right? So can you sort of share a little bit of what the inside scoop in terms of the context, why we were able to do this, from your perspective?
That's probably the million-dollar question there. I want to say the number one thing is rapport. These boys trusted me. And I don't say that lightly. I say that because that trust factor, there's a lot of levels of trust. And these boys believed that if I said I was going to help them with their parole or their probation or their education and tutoring them and helping them, no matter what it is, talking to the parents or whatever it is, I did it for them. So the program came along, and I said this. It was like a sell. Hey, get down, Nick. We'll do it with you. Yeah. And we did this program a few times there. But one of the things that was kind of my way of weeding guys in and out, there were 3 units there, A, B, and C. We call them Alpha Bravo Charter. And each unit had roughly about 10 boys in each unit. And and they have a rec time, each one has an hour of rec time. And I would go into their rec time and I would ask them, I want all you guys to go on the far side of the gym. So they all would go to the far side of the gym. And I want to see how strong mentally you are. And I challenge them. I say, I'm going to try to distract you. Yeah, I'm going to call you names. I'm going to throw things at you. And the thing was, there was a line down the middle of the gym. And these boys would walk down the middle of the gym like this. And if I said something that would kind of trigger them, we were like, oh, you ain't talking like that, Nick. Well, they were weeded out. So I did all of them one by one coming down this line. And there were 5 in Alpha. So I go, hey, you 5 guys are good. I'll talk to you guys later. Bravo came down to use the gym at this time. I did the same thing. Another 5. Charlie came down. There was another 5. So now I had 15 boys. And then I went individually and talked to each one of these boys. I says, hey, I see you got a strong mind. You got a lot of good things going on here. Now I'm going to try to help you get you better at it. They agreed. And I said, what is this program called? So I said, it's called Mindfulness. And just like what I did with you guys with the bottle thing and all this, they were like, hey, we're down, Nick, we'll do it with you. And so our first group, which included, or excuse me, our second group that included all the boys from different modules, was this group. 15 boys would go to the gym, and like for an hour or so, they were so attentive. And I would have officers, and we would be on camera, and our supervisor from Central Control would view it, goes, how are you able to keep those boys so quiet? Why don't you come and see for yourself? And that was kind of the way I sold it to them. 1 rapport, probably 2 trust. Without that, you ain't gonna have nothing. Not at HYCF. Not at HYCF. So that's kind of the insight a little bit on how we were able to get those boys there. And it was nurtured. They would come for a Tuesday and a Thursday, and those other days they weren't there, I constantly talked about it. If they go, hey, be mindful. That's right, be mindful. That's right, be mindful. Then if I started hearing that kind of wording go around the unit, hey, be mindful over there. Nice work. So that's why we kind of sold it, and that's why we sustained it there through that. Because they policed each other, which I could step back and just kind of watch it all. And it was a beautiful thing to watch, just from an officer's view, that I didn't have to constantly tell these guys to do things that I normally would have to tell them. Things like, go brush your teeth. They were like, get it out? It was like, oh, this is great. And that way it kind of helped out a lot. Helped out easy on the officers, and it was, as far as the management, oh, it was beautiful. But that and kind of a skinny is how we were able to sustain it.
So there was a bit of a screening, as you can see, right, to get the eligibility, who would be able to enter the mindfulness program, because we couldn't have kids who are actively, on psychosis or having a mental health breakdown. So it was, Nick did a great job of sort of screening, whoever was more mentally sound and was available to engage in this program. So I'm going to go back, but this was sort of the whole phase in which we did it. So beginning the buy-in, adapting the curriculum to make it relevant to this particular population, a lot of training, planning and preparation before we actually came in. Right? And part of the training and preparation was doing it with Nick, right? So training Nick so that he's also bought into what the mindfulness is and participating in the actual training itself, so he understands how do we do this, right? He was there the whole time we did the program. Each time we came in, Nick was there, just sitting on the side, observing and noticing, but then reinforcing after the session was over. And each time we came in and we actually did the program, we spent an hour doing the debrief. So I would meet with Nick, right, and whoever else was there in terms of professional staff, as well as with the trainer. So every single session afterwards, we spent an hour debriefing. And then revising and replanning, refining and So as you can see, it's a continual adaptation process, even as we were doing it. So the mindfulness program itself was adapted from My Body's Awareness program. They've been doing this for more than 10 years now, in Alameda County and San Mateo County with youth detention. Their curriculum was full of curse words. Every single page, every single sentence was like, F you, blah, 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 because that's how they deliver it to, incarcerated youth, apparently. So they made it relevant, and the guy who was delivering it, he was also incarcerated himself. So the curriculum was, I took it and I'm like, okay, well, we can't really do this. So I had a lot of revision and adaptation but the framework and the principles were all there in terms of similarity. It's pretty much from MBSR, in which they adopted it in social emotional development. And then in refining the modules, I came up with 10. So we looking at theirs and refining it. So that the first sequence was looking at mindfulness of the self, right? So looking at what is mindfulness, how do you engage, what is intro to mindfulness, mindful listening, right? The senses. So we use mindful listening in terms of the senses. The body and the breath being first as the anchor. Thoughts and emotions. We also cover thoughts and emotion on a very, we're not going too much, right? Just introducing different techniques, different ways in which you can introduce this. And then the second part was about relationship, right? Cultivating mindful relationships, right? And then the last part is how does then mindfulness align with whatever your virtues and ethics are? So there's an ethical component in all what we're doing. It's not only just stress and relaxation, but there is sort of an ethical, how does then mindfulness align with your goals and your virtues in life? So how do you engage in skillful choice and decision making? In terms of the class structure, the facilitator, first and foremost, I would say, regardless of any curriculum, right? You can actually, if you're a really good facilitator, it doesn't matter what curriculum you have. You can have the most distinct curriculum and you can do it, and then you can do the connection, right? Like Nick mentioned, the rapport is key. And part of the rapport is that whoever facilitates has to be completely authentic and vulnerable. Right? But there's skillfulness in terms of how much do you reveal yourself so that you create this ability of trust and connection and openness as you're conducting the group. Right? So authenticity and vulnerability is key. And then how do you relate this to the aloha response? So one of the ways in which we talk about aloha is aloha has the ha, right, the breath in it. So mindfulness in part is the presence in the breath. And why is that? Because when you have your breath, you are present. When you don't have the breath, you're not present. Right? You're not remembering this is what you're doing right now. You're breathing. Right? So each time you're getting angry, you've lost, right? You're not at home because you're not in the breath. You're not in the breath. Right? And Nick uses the sort of the Coke can, but we also look at the bottle metaphor. So we do this activity where you shake up the bottle. And when the bottle is shaken, because you've got so many emotions or thoughts trickling through, you don't see clearly. Right? So part of the mindfulness is how do you cultivate that stillness so that all the stuff that's happening up here, like bring it down here to the heart, to the stomach, right? Because we're all up here right now, particularly academics, right? We're all up here about thoughts and images, schemas, and ideas, right? How do we bring it down here so that we can see clearly, right? And that has to do with emptiness. Because if you're full, you can't see clearly. You're full of stuff, right? And you're seeing things through those stuff, through the lens. We sit in a circle, right? So it's part of the work we do. We always sit in a circle. And we start and end with sort of the ritual, right? Believe it or not, adolescents, they actually we all like rituals. So we all start with a chime, checking in, right? Checking your internal weather. And at the ending, we have them reflect in their journal. So we give everybody a journal that we collect at the end. So start with starting and ending. And the content itself, it's a combination of different things. So the actual practices itself, which are introduced in small dosages. You don't start somebody, even as the beginning, 30 minutes, right? A little small dosage, 2 minutes, 3 minutes, increasing, over time. Right? You don't want to shock the system. Right? So mindfulness practice, we have a lot of experiential activities to get them engaged, right? Because with adolescents, you gotta have stories, you gotta have activities, right? You have metaphors, and we had one of our trainers was a master storyteller. So was able to really get the kids engaged, right? And make it relevant to why would you even want to do this, right? And how does this relate to the mindfulness practices? So we did this twice a week for 5 weeks, for the sessions. We had three sessions, three groups, 3 cohorts who engage in sort of this structure sequence. let me share with you some of the participants. So originally we had 36 that were screening, but only 2 dropped out because after the first time they went, I don't want to do this. Right? So we actually had 34 who remained the whole time. We also did it with the female. We went to the female ward and did that. Predominantly see their mixed ethnicity, right? Native Hawaiian, Pacific Islander, primarily Native Hawaiian PI is 55%, which is reflective of those who are incarcerated in Hawaii. We also looked at their case files, so we had to review their case files for each participant, and we went through, and we figured, and this is part of the coding. So, as you could expect, a lot of family history, a lot of family issues, right, with this particular population, and I'm sure those you deal with yourself. Abuse, neglect, mental health issues, huge, right? Those who are, right? Mental health issues, and substance abuse issue. Now, I don't know what's going on there in terms of services provided. I did ask Nick, and he goes, not much. Medication, right? I don't know, therapy, but well, these kids are, they've got a lot of issues that needs to be resolved. Okay, so in terms of the actual study itself, there's a study, you can read about it, so I don't want to go too much into the full details. But we did baseline assessment before we actually came in to do the intervention, and then a week after the actual intervention, we did another assessment. We collected salivary cortisol, also IgA, did a series of surveys, very short, not too long. Right? And then we had reflection journals after each session. So the survey measure itself, from first-person perspective, the actual objective measure, right? Not too many measures, right? But they could complete fairly. It takes about 15 minutes to do these, believe it or not, these measures. Second-person perspective, we actually looked at case files and incidents report, and third-person, more objective indicators. So we looked at biological indicators in terms of cortisol and salivary IgA. So these are the results. So compared to, this is pre-intervention, in terms of pre and post for cortisol. And this is the week before we actually did the intervention. And then when we did it again after 5 weeks of the intervention, this was their profile of the cortisol. This is aggregated across all the participants. Right? So we see that there's a decrease in sort of the stress level. And then with the IgA, which IgA is their immune response, so you want to have high IgA, right? Kind of. So this is pre-intervention. There's pre-intervention. Okay, and then this is post-intervention. So it's slightly elevated, and it's statistically significant, even though their sample was really small. But you have repeated measures, so it shows to be significant in terms of pre and post. Now, in terms of the survey results itself, because of the small sample size, there was no statistical significance in terms of the present awareness measure or the self-regulation measure or the impulsivity measure, but the trend were all in the expected direction. So lower impulsivity after the intervention, higher self-regulation after the intervention, present awareness a little bit higher after the intervention, and mind wandering a little bit less. And again, depending on the gender, the girl seems to do better than the boys in some of this.
Could you tell what is the blue line and the red line? I can't.
Oh, the males and females.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, just the males and females. But both groups did better in terms of when you aggregate them. There was statistical significant effect for perceived stress. So this is perception of stress. So after the intervention, there were lower levels of stress that was perceived by both the males and females. And then, as part of the coding, so we did qualitative codings of the reflection journals. And so this is just one. And some of them were poets to be, right? So they wrote like this little poem. Mindfulness, to be aware of your thoughts during the day. There will be lots and lots. Thought leads to action. So be aware of what you're thinking because the thoughts fly by faster than you're blinking. Meditation helps or forceful breathing, but do it right because only you yourself, you're cheating. So kind of cute. Mm-hmm. And so this particular youth talked about emptiness. Tonight I discovered the true meaning of mindfulness and emptiness. It is to be aware of the situations that are brought upon us and become empty and clear, headed before we answer, react, and set up habitual reaction. So they're able to at least understand language, is, I mean, the whole point of mindfulness is awareness, right? Cultivating awareness. Your thoughts, your sensations, your emotions, whatever's happening. Where's your mind in this moment right now? I'd ask you now, where's your mind right now? Are you aware of all the thoughts that you're having? Any judgment you're having? Are you aware of your breath? Right, so where's your mind and presence right now? Again, so in terms of the qualitative coding, these were the common categories that were reflected by the males and the females. Meditation, breathing, relax were the common ones for the males. Happy, calm, breathing also for the females. Right? So at least they're not saying things that you weren't expecting, like, drugged out, or at least they're like understanding this is part of the experience.
And are the size of the words reflective of the
frequency.
amount? Okay.
Yes, the frequency. Yes. So what worked and didn't work? Well, there was plenty. So from a programmatic perspective, I'm going to use this quote before I give it over to Nick. If you have come to help me, you're wasting your time. But if you have come because your liberation is tied up with mine, then let us work together. Right? Because we sort of have this stance sometimes that we are helpers and we're going to come to help you. Because we see that you're deficient in some way, so we're going to come help you. Whereas this quote talks about that we are actually co-helping each other. You allow me to participate in this endeavor together. And as part of this participation, you're actually helping me. Right? So when we do this, it's from a place of humility and co-interdependence. Right? And I think one of the key factors why what we did in simple, these three co-part worked, was this sort of the realization that we're actually doing this together. Right? This is a new program. Some of these folks are actually new even to doing this program. And we're going to learn together how we're going to do this. So can you talk about, from a programmatic perspective, what worked and didn't work?
Sure. I can tell you that mindfulness, the more we did it, the more insightful it appeared that the boys would share with me. I'll give you for instance, one of the boys, he said, Nick, in order for me to go north, I gotta go south. Now, I didn't understand it. And I asked him, what do you mean by that? And this is what he did. In order for me to go north, I gotta go south. He went like this, and let it go. And that's what he meant by it. And I go, to me, I was like, well, that was deep, guy. I mean, way to put it down like that. And there'll be other guys that would share the same thing. Now, I share that because there's a lot of good things that can happen. Now, the downside of it is, like I shared earlier, trust and rapport. That there's not, these wards, they're not going to trust anybody that comes through those doors. Not going to trust anybody that just sits there just for the program only, and they're not going to listen to you, And it takes that relationship at a higher level than just what they normally have experienced. Now again, these are troubled wards. Their parents have let them down, their friends have let them down, their families let them down, and all that. So until that comes to a point, that's not going to happen. Another thing is, we have staff that will probably try this and half-step it all the way through and say, oh, it's a success. We didn't have a fight. Nobody argued. Great. Pass them on. And that's the problem, too. So it comes from both ends. So it's a challenge, but it's a challenge that if it's met with the right promises, it's beautiful to watch. And like I keep saying this, I've had wards that keep calling the facility. They ask for my personal number. I don't give it to them. I give them the facility number. They'll call and they'll say, I want to speak to Coach Nick, and they'll tell me what they're doing. However they're doing. I'm doing good, I got a job. I'm doing whatever. And that's like my trophy when I hear those things from them. So that kind of general. And again, earlier, the buy-in is huge. Yeah, the buy-in is good. I can sell this thing. I can sell it. But yeah, I just need people to, and it's not, it takes a village. Yeah, I'm sure we've heard that term before. It takes a village to raise a kid, and it does, particularly these kids locked up at HYCF.
So even though, you know, I was, so even though, when the facilitators were conducting the workshops, I would be sitting there, and sometimes I would sit in the circle. Yeah, I think I would sit in the circle too. I would sit, because it's been 3 years and I've done this, right? So I would sit in the circle with them, and I remember one incident when I was just walking down Waikiki one day, and then I hear from this distance, mindfulness lady, mindfulness lady. I'm like, what? I looked around, I go, and there was one of the warden, you know, one of the youth, apparently he was participating. Couldn't recognize him at first because his hair was different, right? He was very different. He was not in the orange, you know, attire. And he just came up to me, didn't say anything. He just wanted to hold my hand, right? So it was just this pure acknowledgement, like, and he would just want to tell me, like, just through that nonverbal, that he was okay. That was it, right? And I remember him afterwards. I'm like, at first I couldn't remember him. Then I remember him after. I'm like, wait, he was the least engaged kid. He was just sitting there, right? He was not engaged. And so I'm like, you never know, right? You never know what sort of seeds get planted when you do this, and what sort of connection. Because for him to call out, you know, walking down Waikiki, mindfulness lady, you know, I'm like, wow. Usually kids, you know, I don't want anything to do with you, right? But so I'm like, wow. Right? And I remember I had that perception that I didn't think this was working because he wasn't engaged. But that's my incorrect perception. You never know. So, from an evidence-based perspective, I'll quickly go through since I don't have much time. There's no RCT. So this study was a pilot study. There's no randomized clinical trial. There was no active group. There's no active comparison. There is no passive comparison group, right? So definitely, in terms of rigor and standard, it does not meet like the gold standard of what's considered evidence-based. So I say it's not. It's what it does is a value added to what's currently, because there's plenty of RCT out there. Right? Like I mentioned, there's more than 125 studies, and increasingly more because that's what gets funded by NIH and SAMHSA, the RCT. So I'm not an RCT person, nor do I profess to be, nor do I have any interest in doing randomized clinical trials in this. My interest is sort of looking at the value added. That's beyond the RCT, right? Because there's other folks who are doing that. So what's the value added? Because when you look at, and Catherine Kurtz, who's she's a really eminent and wonderful scientist, she looks at the sort of RCT evidence base, and she goes, what we tend to see between the pre and post is there are lots of individual variability within this that we don't understand, right? But it gets aggregated. So because it gets aggregated, we think this is what works. But we don't realize that within this, there's a sort of huge black box. There's many things that change in this process that we're not capturing, or we're missing out a lot. Because all we look at is the pre and post, that gets aggregated. The other thing behind RCT is they don't really look at external validity issues, right? Because we're so focused on internal validity, which is why we do RCT, right? We want to make sure that it's the independent variable that creates this sort of associated with this dependent variable, right? But what about the context? What about, does it really work? Because a lot of the trials do not. If you look at the mindfulness studies, there's virtually, aside from maybe a few handful of African Americans and Latinos, you know, maybe 5-6 studies, you know, with children, majority are not with ethnic minority population. So we really don't know what really works for this particular population, right? Let alone developing country, because I also work in developing country, like there's nothing in terms of mindfulness for those in developing country. So implementing mindfulness, I say, considering also, we need to consider, you know, how does the context in which we do mindfulness, because mindfulness itself is a process, right? And when there's a process, it's hard to like put your finger and say, this is it, right? Because things move in a process, right? Maybe what works today, not gonna what works tomorrow. And what works tomorrow, maybe it's not gonna work the next time, right? But we have this sort of idea that because it worked, because we have the evidence, we have all this, that it's gonna, well, maybe, right? And that's part of what we do in mindfulness, right? Because really in the mindfulness is the connection and the rapport that we're trying to instill here. So the consequences in terms of what we do are evidence-based and RCT is we have this idea of this gold standard, right? It all goes back to Plato. There is a gold standard, an ultimate standard that we all want to achieve, right? And this gold standard is fixed. right? Because it's the telos, the ultimate, right? So all of ours as academic, we gotta get that NIH grant, right? And NIH has this sort of, you gotta do our team to do our evidence-based, because that's what is determined, this is reality, right? The consequences is that we're not capturing the process of how this unfolds and the experiences of people, right? You can't just classify people in this group and this group, because there's lots of individual variability within the groups that we're missing out on. And part of the whole mindfulness is this idea of process and change. Mindfulness is all about process and change. Your relationship to this emotion right at this moment, and then the next moment, and then this next moment, right? It's not like, okay, categorize it and put it in some sort of box. And there's this looping effect that's happening that Evan Thompson talks about, that we have these standards, and right now, fMRI is like the gold standard in terms of how do you show that mindfulness has changes in the brain, but he argues that, well, we're stressing as if this part of the brain is where we find the attention and focus. It's like the orchestra, right? How can you say that the orchestra are working in unison? Is there a space, there's a place that this is working in unison? Or is there a place in the brain where this is unifying this sort of attention and ability to get to regulate? No, it happens collectively in an organized structure. But what we tend to do is try to isolate it and say, this is where we find the attention, or this is where we find the fear processing. Well, it is associated, and of course it's correlated, but it's many, many other conditions and contextual factors that comes together, like an orchestra. How do you know this note plays well? Well, it depends on where the note is placed in the context of the whole piece and how everybody else is functioning at the same time. Right? Just to isolate and say, well, this is why this piece plays well, or this note determines that this piece is being played well. You can't do that. Right? But we do that in our science all the time. Okay. Okay, I'm not going to go over that because we don't have time. Okay, so I go back to, so the remaining challenges that we have we're faced now is the sustainability. So we did this study 3 years ago, and now we have a different situation, right? We have a different warden, there's lots of issues, and I've been trying to go back, although Nick's been there, and it's been a struggle, right? For many reasons why it's a struggle. But I'll let that be the question and answer part, because I don't have a long time. Okay, so there are many folks who are involved in this. I want to acknowledge those folks who are involved. And then if you have any, now this is the